Awesome. I think we are there. Hold on, just going to check, Viv. There we go. Oh, Viv, we are live. Viv Groskop. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so just to check in, like it is what, just after 4 o'clock your local time?
Yeah, it's 4:20 in London, and I've just done the school run.
Oh,
Just done the, professional childcare thing of putting my children in front of the television so that I can speak to you. Friday is the day when I usually
awesome.
do school stuff. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just going to say we're talking about haters and critics today. And I can just imagine how all the other school moms hate you if that's the way you look when you pick up your children.
Well, it's not difficult to wear a statement earring.
Oh, and you do it so brilliantly. I love it. I love it. Okay, I get the pleasure, Viv, of so we are zooming our live here into the Facebook group. So for anybody that has not had the honor and privilege of coming in contact with the incredible Viv Groskop, I just got to like lay it all out for people so they get how incredible this opportunity is. Viv, you are a writer, a stand-up comedian, TV and radio presenter. Your third book, How to Own the Room, Women and the Art of Brilliant Speaking, just came out this month, November. And I hear there's talk of a Canadian book deal. So we're all like crossing our fingers and holding our breath.
Fingers crossed.
Awesome. I know that the podcast of the same name, How to Own the Room, really is an opportunity to showcase some powerhouse women where you interview their experience of owning the room. And it became, I think, top 20 in the first 2 weeks of its release.
Yeah, on iTunes. Yeah.
Amazing. And not only that, but you, I know, are also a veteran performer at 4 Edinburgh Fringe shows. You front 2 other popular podcasts. You have presented on BBC Radio 4's Front Row. And you appear regularly on the BBC One's This Week. Hubba. Where do you find the time?
Yeah, well, you've got to stay busy, right? I mean, I've had a freelance career for 17 years now.
Yeah.
And I've done what they call portfolio career, or as they call it now, multi-hyphenate. I've done that since before the internet was invented. So I've always juggled a lot of different priorities and ideas, and I just have the luxury of going where my passion takes me, pretty much.
Well, it's a beautiful thing to watch. And I am grateful that we've been able to get to know each other over the last period of time. But really what I'm excited about today in particular is talking about this conversation that I see so much in our community and online, in these powerful women being defeated or minimized when we encounter critics, haters, naysayers, the Debbie Downers. And it's a conversation that I'm really excited about diving in with you, Viv, because, by virtue of what you do and the career that you have, I mean, you are on the front lines, you are in the spotlight when it comes to being visible. And so I think you are the perfect person to talk about how to deal with haters and critics, because you encounter this, you put yourself in that position or the potential for that every day as a writer, podcaster, performer, radio host, you name it. I mean, you are one of the most visible people I know. And so I'm dying to know, as we get into this conversation, how you handle that, what's the evolution been for you? And really, what is some advice that you can give other women who are watching our interview that are up to big things, growing their business, maybe leading an empire, whether it's their own entrepreneurial venture or inside of corporation. There's so much activity that we do on social media, and the more visible we come, the more attention we get, and not all of that attention is going to be possible. So I'm dying to know how you can, what advice you can give us and knowing more about your journey.
Well, for me, the most important thing about this topic is when people talk about this, and often it is women who are particularly worried about this, because women do get scrutinized more than men. Let's admit it. It's just a fact. People often worry about this in advance of it happening. So
Yes.
they're not necessarily talking about things that have actually happened. It's all things that are in their imagination. And I know from doing the work around the book, How to Own the Room, I'm doing a lot of public events about that at the moment. And I let people ask as many questions as they want in the events. And dealing with the potential for rejection, or what somebody called in one of the events that I did, this lovely young woman said, "Oh, Viv, what I'm most worried about with public speaking is how do you deal with the disapproving looks from the audience?" And this is really what we're talking about, is some sort of metaphorical representation of disapproving looks.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of us, it stems back to childhood, that we've received all kinds of disapproval or perceived disapproval for our whole lives, and we don't particularly want to court it. And I think when some people want to expand their business, or they want to become more visible, they're seeking more PR, or they want to be a bit bolder or experimental in their social media, the first thing they worry about is, what's the disapproval going to look like? How am I going to cope with it? And they get so caught up in imagining what all that's going to be like that they don't even do the things that they plan to do. And so they never actually get any haters, because they never do anything that's worth hating.
Wow. So before they even get out on stage, whatever that stage looks like for them, they're already sunk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have incredible reserves of creativity and imagination for dreaming up all the scenarios for this. And I just call it trolling yourself. It's basically trolling yourself before anyone else control you.
Wow.
And it's crazy. And I feel so strongly about this because I was going to say it destroyed my life, but it destroyed my creativity, and it destroyed my drive for years. You know, I've always been a writer, and that's putting yourself out there a bit, but I was always downgrading my ambition and downplaying my dreams, not doing the things I really wanted to do, because I had such a fertile imagination about what the response of the haters would be, that it drowned out all of my own thoughts of, oh, but I would quite like to do this. And then I would quite like to perform on stage. And then there'd just be a gremlin saying, no, but people will hate you. Yeah. And that's very strong in a lot of us. And
oh my God.
I just got to a point. Yeah, I got to a point in my really mid to late 30s, I'm 45 now, where I had two of my children and the third was on the way. And as my children were getting older, I was always saying to them, you must do what you want with your life. You must follow your bliss. You must follow your dreams. Oprah says it's all good. And then I just was always thinking, but you haven't done it. You haven't done it because you're scared. And it was seeing that hypocrisy that was revealed to me through my own children that forced me out there, because I couldn't bear to live with the hypocrisy of it any longer. I was more scared of that than I was of the haters. So I got out there and I started to do comedy, and it's led to all these other things. And now I'm on the other side of it. I know what it's like to actually have experienced the haters.
So the real haters, not the internal ones.
I've had, 2-star reviews, perhaps even worse than a 2-star review is getting 3-star review, because that's mediocrity. I've had, people complaining about my work. I haven't ever literally had anybody ask for their money back, but I've had people post online saying, I wish I'd asked for my money back. I mean, you get all of that. And then the thing you don't think about is the flip side of that as well, which is when you get 5-star reviews and you get people wanting to come up and have their photograph taken with you because they've seen you on a TV program which you haven't actually been on. And all this kind of weirdness of really small scale, even fandom, is quite stressful. So you have to navigate all of these things. And for me, it's all to do with ego and where your ego is sitting. And when you're trying to hide from the haters, you're trying to protect your ego. And when you're feeling strange around the whole 5-star, amazing, that's your ego feeling like, oh, I don't want to get too puffed up. So it's balancing those things. But it's such a common thing I'm finding with the response to this book of people, not even people giving presentations at work or doing interviews or asking for a promotion, asking for pay rise, all kinds of things. They don't say what they really want. They don't reveal the true extent of their passion or their ambition because they're scared of disapproval.
Yes. Interesting. Now, given your, when you flip the switch and realize that it was worse to live with the hypocrisy than it was to actually encounter real haters, not just the gremlin in your mind. Tell me about what it was. Actually, what I really want to ask, I'm just going to ask it, is I want to know, what is the worst bit of real criticism you have ever encountered, and what was that like? And I'm going to ask that because I know the women who are watching, as you said, we have such incredible creativity of dreaming up how bad it's going to be. And I want to know, what is the reality? What has the worst reality been like for you? And I know I've got my own story, and I think, by sharing it, we aren't tortured by it. So let's share. Ready?
Well, two things spring to mind for me. One is a face-to-face reaction, and the other was a review. And in both cases, they were horrific in the moment, but they led to really positive outcomes. So that's the really interesting thing that I've learned, is that often a response you think is negative further down the line might lead to some incredible insight. And you never quite know what any feedback is going to turn into. So one thing that really springs to mind is a thing that absolutely broke my heart when I was doing a gig for about 150 people for my it was my first proper Edinburgh show, which was called Say Sorry to the Lady, and it was all about apology, which is, with hindsight, it's a terrible theme for a comedy show, although it's quite British, I suppose. But you're just constantly apologizing for everything. So I thought this was really funny, but it's really hard to pull off.
Okay.
And I had this show for 150 people. It was a very mixed bag of an audience, and I knew that I had some of them on board and some of them not on board. It was halfway through me workshopping the show wasn't finished, and I knew there were some people who were really hating it. It's an hour-long show. Oof. Okay. But you have to workshop it to make it work, so that, like, in a month's time it is going to be really good, and those gigs are really hard. And at the end, this man just came up to me and said, like, right up in my face, "It didn't work," and just walked off. Wow. And he was so angry and aggressive. But the worst thing was that I knew he was right, that it hadn't worked and it wasn't that good. And I went to bed that night crying because I was so upset. And I woke up the next morning and I was still crying.
Yeah.
But I then had to go back to the same place the next day to do another event because it was at a festival. And I bumped into this guy who was the festival photographer. And he stopped me and he said, "I saw your show yesterday and I think it's one of the best things I've ever seen. It was amazing." And then I was just like, what the? And that made me realize it's so subjective. And what he'd enjoyed about the show was that it was really brave and experimental, and I didn't really care much if it all worked or it didn't. And he just really enjoyed the process of it and the abandon that I had when I was doing it, and he was on board, whereas this other guy wasn't. And that's how it goes. And that really, really taught me of, don't listen to the most negative person in the room. Don't listen to the most positive person in the room, but don't listen to the most negative person. Like, neither of them are right. And actually, yes, I had the right instinct, which was that it hadn't really worked, and I'd learned loads from it. And I went on and did the next show, and it was much better.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was a face-to-face.
I want to slow down, because what you've said is brilliant in that, and I don't want anyone to step over that. There's three things that spring to mind from that story. Number one, that whether it's praise or criticism, we have to unhook from both of those. We can't let, just as much as we let a criticism defeat us, we have to also unhook from being inflated by
Absolutely.
by the flowery compliments, right?
Totally.
The second thing I heard you say was that it is less about the individual, and it's more about it's an opportunity to really ask yourself what of this comment, whether it's praise or criticism, is true for me. And in your
Yeah.
case, you knew that there were elements that weren't working. There was area for improvement. It was a bold step. So the fact, and that, I think that's one of the biggest insights here, is the criticism that is most gutting to us is what we truly believe as well, right?
Yeah.
You knew that there were elements of the show that were risky and it wasn't complete or it wasn't polished. And for someone to point it out, it's like, oh my God, yes, they see through me. That's what guts us, is when we share or believe the same thing as that piece of criticism.
Yeah.
Wow.
100%.
Opportunity to do the work. I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Was there a third thing?
I think there was, but my mind is
You
like suddenly down the track. I've lost it. We'll come
remember
back
it.
to that.
You remember
Back
it.
to you.
Yeah. The other instance that springs to mind was a review that was just so brutal. And it was for the show that I did the next year. I did a show called Be More Margot. Oh no, hang on, no, sorry. I'm getting this the wrong way around. So that same show I was talking about, Say Sorry to the Lady, I did that show at Edinburgh and I got this review, okay? The reviewer said, I'm sure Viv Groskop is very funny at her own dinner parties or at the tennis club, but she is not a stand-up comedian. I mean, that is the most brutal
Wow.
thing ever. And obviously that was a gutting review to read, because I was about 2 or 3 years into doing comedy. I was starting to get booked professionally. People are paying you to perform, and you've had a review saying that you're not a stand-up comedian. You know, can you imagine it? You know, somebody says, well, Heather Petherick seems like a very nice person, but she's not a coach.
Right.
It was an actual sort of, you are not actually the thing that you say you are.
Yes.
And it was so painful. But I spent a long time analysing that comment and where it was coming from. So I'm sure Viv Groskop is very funny at her own dinner parties or at the tennis club. And part of me was thinking, oh, this person thinks I can play tennis. Which made me laugh, because I've never belonged to a tennis club and I never would. But another part of me found it fascinating because it was a remark about class.
Yes.
This person thinks I'm the sort of person who belongs to a tennis club and has dinner parties. And why do they think that? And is that right?
Yes.
And I took that question and I made another show about it the following year.
Wow.
Which opened with that review saying, you know, I got this review and that's why I decided to write this show.
Wow.
And the other show was about class, and it was called Be More Margot, and it was examining my mother's roots. My mother's very working class. She left school when she was 15. She came over from Northern Ireland. She had a very pronounced Northern Irish accent. She completely ironed it out so that she could speak properly English, middle class English. So in some way, that class story and faking your class is my personal story. And it's also, it resonates for a lot of people in the UK. And the year that I did that show was the year of Brexit, which is also a lot to do with class.
Yes.
So it was like full of really interesting things. And that's the best show that I've done. It's the most personal show that I've done, and it's the best show that I've done. And I would never have thought about it. I would never even have particularly noticed that if that person hadn't have written that really bitchy, horrible review.
What strikes me there, Viv, is how there is the potential, whether it's praise or criticism, there is something to be learned in that. And the maturity it takes to take a hurtful comment like that and look for, what is the truth of this? Where is this coming from? What is it about? And turning that into fodder, fuel for your growth is amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And the vulnerability of saying, this is what it's about for me, and sharing that vulnerability in your next show. Wow.
Yeah, but it also is always informative as well, because that comment helped me to think, oh, am I appealing to the right audience? Because I don't want to be trying to appeal to an audience who find me annoying. So these things are very informative because we can't all please everybody. We are going to have audiences who are totally the wrong audience for us. And we need to know who they are so that we're not putting ourselves in their face.
Yes.
You need to be putting yourself in the face of the person who is going to fall in love with you, or is going to get something out of this or be challenged in a good way. So these things are painful, and sometimes I don't agree with taking all criticism on board. I think sometimes these things can just be ignored, but I think in your gut whether something is relevant and helpful, and you just need a little bit of time to process the pain.
Get past the initial shock and then look more closely at it. One of the things that I think you've inspired that I forgot earlier that I want to pin here is, I don't know who said it, Viv, but this keeps ringing in my ears, is that saying that says, if you're not pissing somebody off, you're also not making any fans. And
exactly.
And that in that way, when we get either flowery praise or gutting criticism, it is a natural outcome of pointing the way, of speaking up, of being visible. And that is a good thing if we're truly seeking to make an impact. It's a good.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure you've said something like this before, Heather, because you're very wise on this topic, but most people don't want to buy vanilla.
No.
You can make organic vanilla, maybe, or you can make a virtue of being the best vanilla, but in general, most people would like the pistachio and cashew nut hybrid weirdo thing that is very specific. So the more you can find the thing that only you could do, the more attractive that's going to be to people. And it can be, I've had to learn the hard way that it can be hard to lean into that thing. And it really helps me as well, all the people that I've worked alongside who, I've seen comedians who, like the first Edinburgh show that they did, they would collect 11 2-star reviews and no other reviews, and then like 5 years down the line they're selling out and everything is 5-star and they're on television.
Wow.
So it's you just have to have the courage of your convictions.
Exactly. So how do you personally now handle both the criticism and the praise? How do you stay in the middle and keep moving forward?
I veer between monitoring it all a little bit myself and sometimes having a process. So, for example, if I'm doing a show over in Edinburgh, that's a whole month, I have a PR who's helping me out with the show and trying to jump on opportunities or shape a particular idea or capitalize on certain things. And that person will be also monitoring the reviews for me, because it's not healthy for me to be doing a show every day and reading every single thing that people are saying about it. And often, now that I'm a few years in, I've got enough people I can go to for constructive criticism who I know will tell me what I need to know. I don't really need to seek out that feedback anymore.
Okay.
But otherwise, so for example, at the moment, my book is on Amazon and I need to solicit reviews, and my podcast is on iTunes and I need those reviews. So I will actively appeal to people for reviews, and I will often say, please give me a warts and all review. I don't, the algorithm, this is another thing I think most people don't realize. Online, the algorithm doesn't really care whether your review is good or bad. It cares about engagement. So it would be better to have a ton of bad reviews than one really good review.
Yeah, or one lukewarm.
Some of the algorithms work differently, but mostly, and publishers want to see this, all kinds of people want to see engagement. That's the thing that people care about the most. So I will read those for a certain, or I'll kind of half look at them sometimes. Or sometimes I'll get my husband or somebody to read them for me. And but I don't want to get too
caught up in that.
Yeah, because you start to, if you read the praise, then you think, oh, I need to do more of that. And maybe you don't need to do more of that. You need to work out for yourself what it is you need to do more of.
Yes. Again, always looking back at what's true for you. What do you know to be true? And what's just rubbish?
Yeah.
Did you see I use that UK term,
Rubbish.
rubbish?
Yeah, I didn't
That
even
was
notice
just for
because
you.
it's so normal to me.
Awesome. Okay, so as we're wrapping up, I want to know what is, for any of the women who are watching this interview, what advice would you give them as they are taking the risk to become more visible, whether it's writing on social media, whether it's sharing something in a presentation, whether it's asking for what they need in their job? What advice do you give them about handling this criticism or praise?
You are your own worst critic, and you're wasting way too much time listening to that critic.
Mm,
So dial down your own criticism for a start. And when you're thinking about what other people's responses will be to your work, whether it's a new product, a blog post, an Instagram story, please believe me from bitter experience, but that their main reaction will be total and utter indifference.
mm,
Most of the time, they will not even notice that you did it. And like, this is what makes me incredibly sad about so many people who are holding themselves back from putting themselves out there and trying new things. It is that like 90% of what you put out there gets completely ignored. I've been a journalist for 25 years. I've written hundreds of thousands of words. There's maybe a dozen articles that I've had in those 25 years I've had any significant cut through.
wow.
In comedy, I've done, hundreds and hundreds of hours, and there's maybe one or two things that I've done that people have picked up on and have really captured people's imagination. Like it's really not that easy to capture people's imagination. And you have to put so much stuff out there, and most of it's going to be ignored. And I think if people realize that their stuff is far more likely to be ignored than to be criticized, they might just get on and do the work.
Yeah, just start making the impact you're meant to make. Stop
Yeah,
stop psyching yourself out and worrying about the what ifs. Just get doing it.
exactly. And the more you do all of the work, the better it will be anyway. And the more secure you will be in putting it out there, so that if and when you do get negative criticism, it will be like water off a duck's back, because this is just what you do.
Yeah. Warts and all.
Warts and all.
I
Look
love
at
it.
Nanny McPhee. Nanny McPhee styles out the
Oh,
wart.
yeah. I love what you're saying, Viv. And I would completely echo that sentiment, that I think so often as women we think that we need to wait to be perfect, or that we need to be so buttoned up, because we're expecting critics and haters and naysayers to be, at the ready to beat us back. But
Mm.
people are waging their own battles, right? They are far more interested in their own, productivity and their own outcomes than they are ready to, light the torches and mount the
Yeah,
march.
absolutely. I also think this is a generational thing.
Yeah.
I think for women maybe over 35 or maybe a bit older than that, they are not so willing to say, hey, I'm 200 pounds and here's me in a bikini. Which there are loads of women who are 21 who have got millions of followers on Instagram
Mhm.
because they're embracing that.
Yes.
And there's a realness to showing your flaws and your imperfections that actually a lot of people are monetizing.
Yes.
So also a whole kind of hate follow industry. Like if you really want to cultivate haters, you can make a lot of money out of that. So
Yeah.
there's all kinds of really interesting new trends that are coming up now as a result of all the ways that you can make yourself visible.
Mhm.
And by wanting to subscribe to that old school mentality of, oh, you've got to be TV ready and you've got to be look like you've had every photograph taken by a professional, and that's just really old fashioned now. And people much prefer something that looks more raw, that's imperfect. It actually connects with people a lot better.
Yeah, it resonates much more deeply and creates more fans and followers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. Well, I absolutely adore what you've said, Viv, and I know how busy you are. So I am so grateful that you were able to give us some of your time today on a Friday afternoon.
Oh, thank you for having me, Heather.
Yeah, love it. Continue to be a raving fan of yours because you are never vanilla, my dear.
No, that's true. I'm not
And
vanilla.
I'm still quite baffled how anyone could say anything negative about you because you are just so vivalicious. I love
Oh,
it. Absolutely love it. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your experiences, and your advice today to help other women in our community as they are wanting to own the room in their own lives. Thank you so much for being here today, Viv. Where can ladies get more from you?
well, come to my Instagram at Viv Groskop, Vivgroskop, or my Twitter or Facebook, Viv Groskop Comedian. Where else? Or check me out on Amazon. I'm hoping my Canadian deal is going to come through, but
Yes.
you can order it on import from the UK.
Yes,
In the room.
we will do that. Love it. All right. Can't wait to see more from you, Viv. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for today.
Heather. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
All right. You too. Bye bye.